Hello, Daniel. You're
Hello.
somebody I've been kind of doing the professional stalky stalk. And because we're both in a similar but different topic, I've seen your website probably 12 to 12 months to 2 years ago. So it's nice to actually get to have a conversation with you.
It's an absolute pleasure. And now I know who's been, uh, stalking me and looking me up and adding all those hits to my website. I probably.
Well, okay, we'll just say that yes to that. Um, how are you? What have you been up to? What are you working on? Who are you? Come on, give us some juice.
Sure. So look, I work with lots of different organizations and industries. Recently spent a fair bit of time in Canberra with the public sector leaders down there. So working with a bunch of sort of mid-level leaders on how to understand their people and manage them more. Just come back from a trip to speak at the HR L&D Tech Fest, which was very cool. Really good to work with a lot of HR people and HR professionals. And look, my main, I guess, thing that I work on is how do we better understand these wonderful, crazy things called human beings that we interact with all the time, and we like to think we understand sometimes, and we bump into and wrestle with quite often. So it's really how do we better understand what drives people, why do they do what they do, and how can we use that information to support each other to make better decisions and to improve performance that we're looking for in all our elements of our life.
I love that, and I've not heard that phrase before. How we bump into our other fellow humans. I really like that. That creates all sorts of analogies for me, which I like. That's good. And I think that's kind of the crux of being a better human, right? Whether it's for business or family life or whatever relationships we're bumping into in whatever context, it's how can we do that better with more conscious consideration, both of our own stuff, but also, well, what might somebody else be coming to the party with? What might be going on in their world? And I think the phrase putting yourself in other people's shoes, I think for some people they don't really know what that means. And I love all the work that you're doing in that space.
It's an interesting one because I actually don't always like the term put yourself in someone else's shoes because you might imagine your experience in their situation, but your experience won't necessarily be a good proxy for their experience. So, I think you're right. This is how do we interact and bump into each other. I think it's a nice way of putting it. But the better thing I think is, and this is something I work with people, particularly leaders, quite often on, is when you're going to interact with someone, what do you want for them?
Mm,
Often we're very good at answering the question, what do you want from them? We're really good at that. And I've worked with people going into to pitch and people going into try and rally against some big leadership decision, and they sort of the metaphor is pitchforks and torches, and we're going in to get what we want from them. But rarely do they sit back and think, actually, what do I want for that person? How would I like to help that person? What at the end of this interaction, what are they going to walk away with that's going to make them better and that I'm going to be really happy with? And that's not giving them everything they want necessarily. That's not just doing whatever's that they require of you or want from you, but it is considering what's going to be the outcome for them.
I love that win-win. Humaning, win-win. We don't always get what we want, but sometimes we get what we need.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and I think when I think about the discussion that the topic that you talk around and you help people with around being an empath, again, sometimes we care so much, we worry so much about what we want rather than what's actually going to be beneficial and helpful for someone else. And I think that can get us into trouble in lots of different parts of our life. How do we really understand what's going on at a deeper level, which is challenging?
It is, because as you mentioned, it's about our perception, and our perceptions can only be based on our experiences, whether we've lived them or heard them secondhand. How we perceive the world around us is one, I guess, opinion. It's one. People don't understand what having perspective means. It's like you're looking through one set of binoculars, and the person next to you is also using binoculars, but they're just slightly off 2 degrees onto the horizon, seeing something completely different, same but different. And I think that perspective piece is, it's a bit blasé to say. It's like, well, where are they coming from, or what is it that you're pushing, agendas? Like, people don't understand what that means necessarily. And it's all about, what binoculars are you using and what are you focusing on versus them, and looking back at you. It takes a lot of self-analysis, and that's a whole journey, isn't it, Nigel?
I think, yeah, absolutely. I would agree totally. And the one of the things I often will talk to people about is the way we think, or the way it seems like we interact with other people in the world, is that they do and say and act in certain ways, and then we react to that. So it's sort of a natural, like a tennis match that's going on. So they said something, therefore I had a reaction to that. And that's a common way, but it's actually a really disempowered way to think about it, because in that interaction, if I feel bad, it's their fault and they have to change, and
Mm,
I've got no control.
mm,
The the better way to think about it, is actually they will do, say, and act in certain ways, but I then interpret those interactions, those behaviors, those comments, whatever they might be. I interpret them through these mental models, or these structures, these tools that I've built, these heuristics, as we'd call it, to try and interpret, well, what's the meaning behind that data that's just come into my brain. And if we're not consciously aware that we're using certain mental models, and they may or may not be useful for this situation or this person, and that we need to adapt them, then we can run into trouble. And I'll give you a horribly stereotypical example, which may cause offense to some people. So apologies if anyone's offended by this. But if you grew up in a really like super conservative, traditional sort of Downton Abbey style house, right? Then early on, you might learn a mental model that says when someone is yelling, that means bad stuff's happening, right? Danger, scary, terrifying, runaway, bad, right? And again, it's a stereotype, but you might interpret that. And so anytime you would hear yelling, or someone yelling, speaking very loudly, you might get that, oh, danger signal going on, right? And it feels like the danger's coming through the sound. Again, it's stereotypical, so please, no offense, people. But if you grew up in, say, a traditional Italian household, or some people tell me a traditional China, like a Shanghai type household, or someone from Hong Kong, or again, the stereotypes aren't as important. But what you might think yelling means is nothing in particular. It's just people speaking passionately or loudly, or trying to speak across the top of each other. And, sometimes when you're in a busy household, shouting is the only way to make yourself heard. And so that person might interpret yelling completely differently. And while, again, there's stereotypes, and I think it's bad to labor on them, it's indicative of how we interpret the world. We take a set of mental models to analyze what's going on, and we assume that those are correct and universal. And almost all of them are not correct and universal. Almost all of them are very subjective. We make them up, and we can change them and adapt them anytime we want, but it takes some work. And I think that's a really important part of, when we're hearing these different comments from people. Am I interpreting that in the way it was meant or is intended? And that's a hard question to answer sometimes.
Yeah, totally agree. And a lot of people don't realize that what they've experienced, particularly in the first, we'll round it up to 10 years, that sets those models subconsciously, not permanently, but pretty ingrained. And we don't even, there's no right or wrong to any of this. And it's just our set of binoculars we use in life and going, this is how life is done. And then you come across something different. And it's, as you say, it creates a response, a reaction. It's like, ooh, that's different. It could be awkward, uncomfortable. It could be scary. It could be, some people like the polarizing, some people stick status quo, the same. So all of our experiences in the same household can be sets of twins, have the same experiences, but their interpretation, that as you call them, the mental models, their internalization, the logic, and the subconscious, all of that does not always equal the same outcome. And it's fascinating how the human mind works.
Yeah. Yeah, I like to say that your brain you don't really experience the world. What happens is data pours into your brain and your brain interprets the world and it creates your world second by second. And your world gets created slightly differently to mine, even when we're in exactly the same place. And that can be seen as a bit weird, but it's actually awesome because it means we can all learn different worlds and explore different ways of seeing the world by just understanding each other a bit more.
Yeah, that's what makes us unique, not robots. It's that filtration, as you're saying, all this information is coming through, and how we choose, or our subconscious chooses to interpret it. It's fascinating stuff. And the thing I guess you'd like to talk about is the choice of how we respond, the choice of how to um, maybe see somebody with a different perspective or approach something that is clashing with a different strategy. Let's really talk logic and um, how our desires, wants, wishes of how something to be and how it turns out absolutely infiltrates and affects our agenda of where we're going with that. And then we've got all of our own personality and our personal strengths and our unique traits. Um, one I talk about is I'm getting married in just over a month now. And my approach as a leader into delegation is give them an overview and then let them get on with it. But what I'm discovering is that's actually really hard for some people. They're like, I want to do it your way. This is your wedding. I want to do it. So give me really clear instructions. Whereas I'm like, I don't do it your way. Bring your own creativity into this project. So our personality traits are quite unique.
And that becomes incredibly important when we think about, leading a team. And I work a lot with people leaders, people who are trying to lead teams in all sorts of industries, right? And the common challenge I often find is someone's really good at their job. So let's say they're, I don't know, an accountant. They're a really good accountant. And someone says, hey, would you like to be promoted? Of course, they go, yeah, cool. All right, so you're going to now be the head of the accounting team. Okay. And in our heads, we sort of go, okay, well, that's just being the boss accountant. That can't be much harder than being an accountant. And of course, what happens is I get promoted and then I don't know what I'm doing because I've never been taught how to lead. And I've got all these people who look at me and go, you need to lead us. And some of them will say, I want you to tell me exactly how to do all of these things. And some of them will say, just help me when I'm feeling stressed out. But the problem is none of them actually say that out loud. And they just sort of go, okay, well, you know how to lead. Good luck to you. And of course, what we tend to see is a leader will, who's really good at their job, they'll micromanage and they'll support this person over here who likes to get told exactly what to do and really annoy everyone else in their team by doing the same thing for all of them. And so, again, this idea that empathy can be understanding not just what they say they want or need, but understanding what's really going on. What are those subconscious drivers, understanding them as humans, as people, and then trying to support them in the way they need. That's a lot harder. And again, you won't find that in accounting books. So you've got to go and work on this in a different way.
Yeah, and one of the things that I love to talk about, which is the same but different, the same topic as such, but a different, completely different angle, and that is how, as empaths, we can resonate and feel other people's energies as well as other receptors. But sometimes we've got to no, we always have to learn the difference between other people's energy and our own. But sometimes somebody else's energy can influence us. And so we are incorrectly making assumptions around how they're feeling and what I'm picking up or resonating with, and making an assumption of how I should be responding or leading or interacting with them. And the challenge can be, if you haven't mastered what your own vehicle, your own energy sphere is doing, then that I love that bumping. You're bumping up a bit like, stars are kind of got this magnetic energy that's going on, and they're coming in, and then there's like this bounce off, this magnetic repel. And then other times we're being drawn towards it because you've got the plus and the negative, and they're being magnetized together. And so you're really resonating with someone. If you don't understand, that's all their energy, and you're just in the right frequency at that time. And you can respond completely in the wrong way that supports them. It's not actually in their best interest to 100% feel and resonate in the same way that they are. So an example is somebody's having a really hard time at home, coming into the workplace and still pondering, and it's going on in the background, it's ruminating, or maybe there's a big blow up, maybe there's an imminent breakup. Like it's all consuming. We're not robots. And so we bring that into our workplace, and the leader may feel that we're not gelling. I'm doing something wrong as a leader. I need to change my approach, instead of making the assessment about the assumptions being made about what's going on in that world for that person.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you find, this is me asking you a question on your podcast, but it's okay. Do you find that there's a correlation between people, I'm going to use the term people pleasers, being people pleasers, and and having that sort of response of needing to, or wanting to fix it, and you're wanting to make it better. I see that quite a lot in lots of different facets, and it can be useful sometimes, can be debilitating others. Where do you see around this sort of people pleasing and wanting to fix other people that pops up quite often?
Great question. And there isn't a straight answer. It can be a couple of things, but primarily, it could be as a highly receptive empath who isn't mastered. It could be wanting to stop feeling a certain way. They don't even realize, or they think it's their own energy and they want to change how they're feeling. So that people pleasing is actually, how do I stop this emotion or frequency happening? This person's having a really hard time, and I think it's me, and I want to stop that. So I'm going to be the best friend today. The other way people pleasing can come through is from personality, upbringing. It can be cultural. It could literally be the way you believe it should be done, as in humaning. And you can be a yes person to your own detriment. And this is not new information. We know that this is a thing that humans do. Again, it's, where does that come from? Is it learned? Is it because you're trying to get the promotion? Like, there's so many angles around why we respond or do things in a certain way. So I don't know if that answers your question, but absolutely, people pleasers, that label, they're the people I often work with, especially the thought leader kind of. They've got a team, a small team, and they know that they are being the people pleasing boss instead of a delegation, or not just an authoritative, but that directional. They kind of are uncomfortable for whatever reason, often because they haven't had the training that you were referring to, how to be a leader and to detach from the human. This is not personal. This is a transaction of some sort. And I don't need to be their best friend to have empathy. I don't need to feel their, I don't need to completely match what they're experiencing in order to empathize. The challenge with being empathetic is you feel it, and then how do you protect yourself against it? Or how do you purge yourself from these frequencies at the end of the day?
Mm.
So you can go in clean. I've worked with a lot of counselors, healers, psychologists who burn out because they haven't realized and they haven't learned or they haven't been taught. How do you, and it's not being stonewalled against it, it's just literally putting a protection around how far. If you think about this, my analogy is, if you have somebody's in front of you, how comfortable are you with them being in your safety zone?
Yes.
A well-developed rounded human can be quite comfortable, assuming it's not threatening or inappropriate or sexual or anything like that. But somebody can stand quite close to you. I often, like, somebody will literally be, clothing will be touching. I'm really comfortable with that. My boundary is still solid, that their stuff doesn't infiltrate, their magnet isn't impacting me. And learning how to have that level of subconscious, I'll call it protection, can be a huge game changer for coaches, therapists, anybody in that space who has a role to play in somebody else's well-being.
Mm.
How can you be present to somebody's breakdown, hold the space, have empathy, but not be empathic?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think the academics call it somatic empathy. It's this, it overcomes you, and yeah, sometimes, particularly when I'm working with leaders, I'll sort of say, just as you mentioned, be very careful with that, because if someone's really stressed, burnt out, self-destructive, and you're trying to lead them, you feeling like you need to be burnt out, stressed, and self-destructive as well might not help the situation one iota. I mean, we've probably all had a good friend who their way of helping us is to lead us down some horribly, probably often fun garden path where we all get into massive trouble. But yeah, that's right. But it doesn't. That's not really leadership. And I think this is, it's a really important skill for people to learn. Some people, as you said, experience it so strongly that it's almost debilitating.
Yep.
Other people don't experience it at all or struggle to really tap into it. And they think that what they need to do is mimic or try and pretend that they feel it. And that's, again, a fool's sort of journey there. We're not going to get to anywhere to help. Actually, it's being able to sit at that comfortable distance you mentioned and say, what is going on over there? What's happening? What are some of the things driving it? And if I'm in a position where I need to help this person, what are the things I could do that might help support them?
Yeah.
And that's very different from feeling, I think.
One of my favorite, I guess, overarching philosophies is to live with curiosity. And what that in this context means is catch your assumptions, catch your own reactions, and have a proper conversation. And that brings in the vulnerability of saying, I'm sensing or feeling this, and I'm not sure if this is my interpretation or if it's you. Can we, let's just have a decent conversation so that we can get through this and remove all those assumptions and perceptions that are going on, so that we can go back to doing our job? Because ultimately, doing a job, there's a responsibility to the employer. And as much as, again, we're not robots, and I'm ex-corporate, I work for accounting and law firms, I get it. You're there and you have to perform, but the good leaders in those firms understand that human stuff goes on, and how can we help somebody navigate that in the workplace while some crap's going on? And let's acknowledge there are narcissists in the world who have jobs and who live in people's homes. So those sorts of reactions that people are experiencing are hard and real, and we're in tough times. Emotionally, we are more intelligent, yet more disconnected than we've ever been. And we're going through a beautiful transition of learning how to be empathetic towards others. But that has to
Hmm.
come from understanding ourselves first.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's that gets really hard sometimes because when you are working in an organization, small or large, actually sometimes smaller is even more crucial. you
Mm-hmm.
know, we have to deliver, we have to support each other. And you know, one of the things I talk about a lot is this idea that sometimes you've got to fire people with empathy. And you know, people go, well, that doesn't sounds like a bit of a paradox, but actually it's not empathetic to let them struggle. It's not empathetic to leave them in a job where they're not being successful, they're not feeling engaged or enriched, they're struggling, they're underperforming. But more broadly, it's not empathetic towards the customers and clients and stakeholders that are getting underperformance from this person and underservice from this person. And it's particularly if they're in a team, it's really damaging to the rest of the team when someone is underperforming. And again, empathy says, or the empathy directs me to go, well, why are they under, what's going on? Is it something personal? And if it is, I need to ask. I need to try and understand. I need to build a trusted relationship to be able to have the conversation. Because if I just assume it's personal, then I can't help. If it's not personal and it's actually skills, they just don't have the skills to do the job. And I just think it's personal and put them in a box. Wow, I'm doing this person such a disservice. And you know, if they just aren't, if their heart's just not in it anymore, again, you need to understand that and then think, well, how can I help them find the thing that will make them happy, make them engage, make them be have a more purposeful career. And again, this is where leadership is about saying it's not about being nice to the person, right? Let their friends do that, right? Let someone else do the nice. No, it's about supporting this person. As a leader, I have a responsibility to help you develop, grow, and have a great career.
Mm.
So I need to take that responsibility really seriously. But to do that well, I need to understand what's going on. And so that again comes to that curiosity you talked about.
Yeah, love it. One question I was asked, actually, I was speaking in an L&D event a while ago, and a gentleman asked me, he's like, well, how do I know if I'm an empath or somebody else is an empath? Like, if I want to be a better leader and understand whatever this thing is, how do I understand it? And then he proceeded to tell a story before I got to respond, which was really cool. And he says, because I'm not empathic. I don't really understand what some of you other HR people were nodding, going, yes, 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 I understand all this stuff. He said, um, I'm not, I don't connect emotionally with people very well, and I'm okay with that. I actually like that. He said, but I have found, I've got a 2-year-old daughter, that sometimes the same behaviors are applying to my relationship with my daughter. And I actually do want to bond with her. I want to have a beautiful, and he said, daddy daughter relationship. And everybody was like, oh, that's really beautiful. And he says, but I'm finding I've got this kind of, I don't know how to do it. He says, and as he was telling the story, he's like, but when I was a kid, I was really huggy. Like I actually, I think I used to do things differently when I was younger, and I want to do that with my daughter. And many of us were just listening, smiling. And one of the conversation points earlier was, I really struggle, somebody else was saying, with feeling too much. How do I not be such a sponge? And then I said to this gentleman, I was like, Sarah over there wants to know how you protect yourself so well. And a light bulb went off for him. He was like, I have learned, haven't I? I was like, yeah. Sarah wants to know what you did so that you can be so switched off at work that it doesn't impact you the way it's affecting her. So my point, and wonderful observation, and I was so grateful for him sharing that in the room of, contrasting of, we do learn how to switch it off. We are born empathic on a scale. Like, we're all born with talents. Some are better runners or athletes. Some people are better readers or musicians or whatever. And some people are very highly tuned empaths, and we've unlearned, or switched it off, or haven't skilled it up. And so this gentleman was an empath, but somewhere between that childhood where he was really affectionate and would feel and love being around the people around, he learned not to do that in the workplace. So all we gave him permission to do is, you can have two living styles, one at work and one at home. You can be two different personality types depending on the circumstances. You can dial it up or dial it down. Your receptors are a skill. Like a trainer, sorry, like an athlete who trains, they're not always sprinting full pace. They dial it back depending on what they're working on. And so some of those metaphors help people understand, oh, I might be an empath, or somebody around me might be. They just haven't learned how to dial it up or skill it up.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, again, it's one of the things I think for particularly people who are maybe naturally, empaths, and they do have that sort of surge of emotion and feeling when someone else is having an emotion, being able to build that that barrier or that protection is really important because, one of the areas I talk about a lot is giving hard feedback. Right.
Mm.
So in a team, sometimes people will do things that are damaging to themselves, to others, to the performance, behaviors that are not acceptable or not supportive, and you need to be able to have a conversation with this person and tell them very clearly what the behavior is, why it's a problem, what we need to do, and all those sorts of elements that we talk about in feedback. But if at any point in that conversation, an emotion that happens on the other side of the desk influences your ability to give effective, objective, and supportive feedback, then that can be a real problem. And the common one is, I'm giving someone feedback. Now I'm going to give you some feedback. I see a tear in your eye. Right. And my brain goes to, oh my God, they're upset, they're sad. I've done something. I feel terrible. I feel sad, or I feel guilty, or whatever it might be. And I just go, oh, look, let's just forget about it and let's move on. And in doing so, I've done a disservice to everyone. I've not helped the person with the clear feedback. I've not helped them improve. I've not helped my team. I've not helped those customers or clients. I've actually let everyone down. And so in that instance, being able to acknowledge, hey, look, I can see that this is making you emotional. Do you want to take a break? Maybe we should have 5 minutes. We'll come back. But this is really important. And I need to talk to you because I care a lot about helping you through this. So we have to have this conversation. Let's
Mm.
make sure we do it together.
Yeah. Nobody said this bumping against humans was easy.
Oh, it's bloody hard. It's probably the hardest thing we have to do.
And again, I like to reference there are people who are good at manipulating with their emotions.
Yes.
There are people who have mastered, probably in childhood, how to avoid those conflicting conversations. And they may have had a parent who was really good at avoiding it themselves because they didn't like it. So as soon as the emotion came out, some may call it pandering to the reaction, but oh, okay, right. And they've learned how to use it subconsciously. It's not always intentional. In fact, mostly it's not intentional to avoid the awkward emotions that are about to be expressed because we framed it up. And as you say, it's up to the leader to explain up front that this is because we want you to be amazing. We see all the good that you're doing, or we see the potential that you're just not stepping up to. And as you alluded before, why is that? Maybe the job is not what you interviewed for. And I've had that. HR do the interviewing and then a different leader actually does the leading. You're like, that is not how I thought this role was going to go. I'm really disappointed.
Yeah.
When I used to be an EA, executive assistant, and I used to interview the leaders, the person I was going to work for, it was always part of my interview process. I must have an interview with my boss, the person I'm going to be supporting. And there was 2 times I said, nah, I can't work with this person. They're not who's, I know there's going to be conflict and or I know that there's something that's not right. And I just intuitively like, I don't want this job.
Yeah. I think it's a really important, again, to have that understanding that we aren't all going to just get along perfectly all the time. There are different personalities and different ways, and I think we all can work together. the challenge or the gap we have to bridge sometimes can be quite significant. And if we want to go into a job and have a good working relationship, understanding that other person is such a critical part of the journey. I think the other thing you touched on, which sort of struck for me, is so often I get asked about what about psychopaths and narcissists and these sorts of things, and I'm like, well, firstly, we all have the ability to display psychopathic or narcissistic behaviors, and diagnosing someone, etc. Let's park that to the psychs. But if someone has the ability to be, display a psychopathic or narcissistic behavior, it doesn't mean that they're not empathetic. Quite often the opposite. Quite
Mm-hmm.
often they're very, very good at
Mm-hmm.
understanding your triggers, your emotions. They're not usually somatic in the way they don't feel it, but they notice it, and they use those emotions to manipulate and coerce people to do the things that they want, what they want from people. And
Mm-hmm.
again, this is something that developing those barriers and that awareness, that self-awareness of what are my triggers, what are the things that rile me up, and then how do I manage those? I think you probably have this experience speaking on stage or working with leadership teams. Sometimes you'll have someone who they've just got an axe to grind today, and their question is not really a question. It's a good 4-minute rant, and usually pretty negative and directed at specific people. And people have said to me, "Oh, gee, I'm amazed how nothing seems to phase you. You just handle it." And I say to them that that's not natural. It's something you have to practice.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't practice and develop it, then that person influences your whole experience of everyone in the audience, and that's not okay.
Yeah, it
And
is.
so we have to learn to build those barriers.
I like to whenever I get into not dark narcissists and that I've got the wheel of the study, and this is like you say, it's all studied and a diagnosis. Um, my favorite, again, I love a good metaphor, but this is actually an example of a true narcissist in its purest, most innocent form is a baby. It literally will manipulate the crap out of its mother to get what it needs.
Yep. Oh
It's
yeah.
just going to interpret what it is.
And they grow out of it slowly too, in my experience.
I have a couple of friends who have little young ones, and geez, it's fascinating to observe the default uh, abilities that little children's have to manipulate, and then they'll try another angle and they don't get the lolly, or they don't get to play, or whatever it is, and then it's not that their mind is working, but it kind of is, and you'll see them come back 3 minutes later, or they'll go to dad, or they'll do something, you're like, oh, you little minx, that was masterful in
Yeah.
its innocence.
Well,
And
yeah.
when we understand that some people have just really freaking developed that intentionally or unintentionally, and what's the definition of a narcissist is somebody who just does it for their own outcome. Like, that is it. If everything is turned around for their own gain, that is the simple definition of a narcissist. And they do. Again, everything's a spectrum. We've all got narcissism. If we don't have narcissism in us, we will die at the first accident. We won't feed ourselves when we're supposed to. Like, there's actually a purpose to self-preservation.
Mm.
Like you say, someone just worked out how to use it for their own gain that isn't survival.
Yeah, I think a similar but slight twist on that. It's in our brain is basically designed to help us achieve goals, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the fundamental goal is survival. That's important. And so we've got a piece of our brain that says keep breathing, heart beating, blood pressure. It does all that stuff for us, thankfully, and it's deeply rooted. And then if you think about stacking all of these other goals on top, it's what I think we're all trying to do is achieve these different goals. And sometimes we're not even aware of what they are or why we're trying to achieve them, but we're trying to achieve a certain set of goals. And again, that becomes a really useful place, even when you're dealing with a narcissist, is to say, well, hang on, what goals are they trying to achieve? And often what I find, I don't know if you've seen this, Mel, but when someone's confronted with a narcissist, they either flee or they want to fight them,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm going to take them down or I'm going to run a mile, right? And what I've seen, and there's some good evidence behind this, is that can actually be very useful if I instead think, what are their goals? What are they trying to achieve? And how do I work with them to achieve those goals? Sure, we can be very cautious, and we should be of certain behaviors, but that goes for absolutely everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has the ability to display these narcissistic behaviors, and our ability to go, okay, well, what are you trying to achieve? What are your goals? What are you trying to do? How can I work with you, help you, support you? How can we help each other to achieve those goals? For me, that's a much more practical and useful way to approach these situations than I'm going to take you down, and it starts like a whole ongoing saga that they'll write about in 1,000 years, as in some Greek mythology or something, right? But it's about sort of having that awareness that they're just a person. They're just flawed like the rest of us. They've got some stuff going on. Cool, so do I. How could we work together if we have mutual goals and we want to support each other?
Yeah, I agree. The true. I mean, I didn't understand what narcissism was until I came across one in my immediate new friendship circle, and it taught me so much. It was amazing at the end of it. I understood so much around myself and my responses, and then reflecting back on how other people responded. And it's fascinating. Now, a skill, it's like, oh, I can spot and I can tune into that frequency. I actually know what that frequency feels like after a couple. Now, some of them are very good in covert, but this isn't necessarily um, about how to interact with narcissists. It's actually about how to interact with myself so that I can choose, as you say, I just avoid that person. Just make my life easy. I can't get rid of them. I'm pick your battles. I'm not a fighter, and I know how to play the game. You treat it like a political game of, I know your agenda. I can see you, or it's not always declared, often it's not, but I actually have a sense of where you're going with that. Good luck. I'm going to keep going on this path and not let that distract me. I talk metaphors about sailing a lot. It's, where do I want to go? Where's my harbor? Where's my port that I need to deliver to? Do your storm over here. Let someone else deal with that.
Yeah.
And often they're not getting what they want from you, which is dramatic energy. They're looking for the drama. And so you're not giving it to them. You're just like, neutral, carry on over there, waste of space. And then they often leave you alone
Yeah.
because they're not getting anything from it.
Yeah, I think that's right. And again, it's maintaining control. I think there's this beautiful phrase or quote that I'm going to butcher, but it's from Viktor Frankl, and he says, between stimulus and response, there's a space, and in that space is our power to choose our response,
Mm-hmm.
and through that choice comes our growth and our freedom.
Mm.
And it is being aware that lots of people will act and behave and do things, and events will happen around you, and you will then have to choose how to interpret them, choose how you want to respond to them, and those choices are 100% our accountability, our responsibility. We own those choices, and it's it's consistent in so many memoirs and books and accounts and stories that the same situation impacts people very, very differently. And it's not because of the circumstances are identical. It's because of the way they choose to respond. And actually, that part about our freedom, I think, is so important, because we all sort of want our lives to be better, but too often we want someone else to do the work. And no, this is our job. It's our life. We got to work it.
Yeah, I like to give the perspective that um how other people think of us is none of our business. How an outcome lands is outside of our control. As you say, the only thing we can control is ourselves. So even our initial reaction, our response, those choices, and then we get to choose how we respond to the outcome. And that attachment to an outcome, or that disappointment to an outcome, whatever that outcome that we thought we were leading towards, with all our conscious choice and freedom of response, also none of our business to a certain degree. Now, we're talking in very generalistic terms. Now, obviously, as in the workplace, we don't just ignore the narcissist who's creating a lot of drama. We don't just ignore the outcome. We're not saying that. We're talking about in general, day to day, as we're bumping against those humans, the outcomes is always going to be perceived differently from our expectation of how it's going to turn out. And that is the joy of being a human on this gorgeous planet.
Yeah. I'll give you a really a simple example that I use quite a bit. Because I've got a friend who said to me, I always get red lights. My mum's a bit prone to this as well, I think. Every time I drive, it's my luck. It's just my luck. I never get lucky. It's always bad luck. And I'm like, okay, cool. What I noticed about them is whenever they go through a red light, they make a big, oh no, don't go through a red light. When they have to stop at a red light, it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
When they have to stop at a red light, they're like, oh my God, got it again. Damn it. And they have a reaction to it. And I said to this friend of mine, every time you go through a green light, what I'd like you to do is go, yes, just have a little bang on the steering wheel. Got it. Nailed another one. Because what you'll find is you go through a heap. You go through a lot. Statistically, you go through probably more than you go through red lights. And you just don't think about them. You don't bring them to conscious awareness. You just pretend, you just ignore them. And then you focus all your energy on all of the negative ones. And it feels like there's more of them, but that's all. It just feels like it. And I think, again, when we're dealing with lots of people, a lot of people say, oh, there's so many narcissists. I'm like, well, statistically, that's untrue. It's just not. Like 5% probably is the sort of rough estimate. One in 5 in 100, is that all you're going to bump into? Relax. What you're seeing is normal people who are acting in certain ways, and you're interpreting that as a narcissistic behavior, which it may or may not be, right? But then you're choosing to let that drag you down into some bad place. That's on you. You've got to make that change.
And or you are so focused on that, as you're saying with the red lights, that's all you're observing. Therefore, what we focus on is what we create.
Yep.
And so the more you focus on the negatives of the world, you actually then shift your frequency, and more of that stuff is happening. And then you're evidence stacking, and you create this spiral.
Yeah.
And as you say, as you change your shift to something positive, as simple as, hey, you're completely ignoring, it's not that they're not happening, you're choosing not to even see that they're happening. Or people saying, I want to make more money, and they win a competition. You got more money. You're not focusing on, oh, I wanted more in my salary and into my bank account. But you're not focusing on your actual joy and your moment of your desire. You're fixated on one way that you think the world needs to operate. And I'm sorry, it is a marvelous environment that we get to play in every day. And what we choose to focus on is going to impact our interpretation of our life, of our existence.
Absolutely. I'll give you a really simple thing that people can do if they're working in a team and let's just play two sort of roads of thought that sort of play out from here. One is that I'm working with someone and we don't, we're not besties. We don't really get along. I sort of interact with them and I see them do something that I think, oh, that's frustrating, right? And maybe they don't put their coffee cup in the dishwasher. Massive, massive corporate no, right? Anyway, I see that. And then what my brain subconsciously does is look for other things they do that I don't like. And oh, they didn't type that email the way I would have typed it. They didn't put, the way they wrote that, or the way they printed that out. I would have done it differently. And I start finding things that are the differences that I don't like about them. That start to build and build. I'll talk to other people who are like me. They'll share those things, and then we'll form a really strong view. And suddenly we're down this path where that person's a bit of a problem. They're a troublemaker. We don't like them.
Full evidence stacked. Love it. Yes.
Yeah,
Thank
a
you.
separate path, which is really simple, is I see them do that thing in the dishwasher and I go, huh, maybe I'll have a conversation or just mention it. But then I'm going to actively look for what are the things that they do that I do like. And a really good thing to do is write them down. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I'm going to go and talk to this person at any stage, I've got these things front of mind that actually, gee, they're always here on time. They're always, very diligent in doing their work. They don't do it the way I would do it, but gee, they get it done. They're always friendly and happy to have a chat. They're warm to other people. They've got a good relationship with such and such. Like, look for the things that are the green lights, the positives, the happies, right? And what you'll notice is there's a ton of them. And if you take that path, you'll probably find that you'll like this person a lot more and you'll work with them more effectively. You still might not be besties, but that's not our job. The thing is that, we have this old saying that, when my friend does something good, it's their nature. When they do something bad, it's bad luck. When my enemy does something good, it must have been bad luck. When they do something bad, it's their nature.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is not out there, it's with us. We interpreted those behaviors and gave them the labels.
A story that I used to share. I started my coaching and energy healing life as a dating coach. And one of the workshops I used to deliver was, dating. How do you do dating? And this random question came up from a female, and she said, "I think I've got a stalker." And everybody kind of completely sabotages the workshop content, and we dive down into this rabbit hole. And at the end of it, and I said, "Look, the key difference between a stalker and romance is whether you're interested in the person or not. Because being romantic could be finding out how you work, male to female traditionally, find out where you work, rocking up with whatever flowers or gifts or something, and then whisking you away for a romantic weekend. Movies are made on this shit. If you weren't interested in the guy, that would be pure stalker. It's our interpretation of the person doing it and how you feel about that individual, whether it's romantic or creepy.
Yeah, absolutely. And give them feedback and see how they respond. Right. If you said, hey, look,
Absolutely.
actually not so interested, can you stop sending me flowers? And they go, no, you love me and we're going to be together forever. Cool. Now you know where you stand and
Yeah.
you stalker and you can play that directly. But yeah, I think that's exactly right. It makes a big difference. The same behaviors in very different ways, in different situations, sorry, and interpretations can be seen very differently.
Mm. Well, should we wrap it up there?
It's been a real pleasure chatting to you, Mel. I've really enjoyed it.
And you, I think it's the fact we're leaving it on that, it shows that there's no right or wrongs. There's no do more empathy, be less empathic. It's a spectrum. It's a constantly evolving. Are the oceans of the current correct? When their tide is flowing in and the tide is flowing out, there's no right or wrong. It's all flow.
Yeah.
And we all bounce into people at different frequencies, different velocities, and some we stick with and some we repel off and we're like, I'm never going to cross that path again. There is no right or wrong to this. There's just self-interpretation if you want to grow and do your humaning a little bit differently or better in your own mind.
Yeah. Love it.
Final thoughts from you?
No, look, the only thing I think, which is always good advice, and I take this from my dear Nana, who was a master of this, is just start by assuming good intent.
I love
Until
that.
proven otherwise, just assume good intent. Bring that as a sort of first lens you look at any behavior through. Sure, you might find evidence after that the person's a nightmare or whatever the case might be, but start with that good intent, because when you start with a negative intent, you tend to stack it up, find more, and yep, the world looks pretty grey and horrible. Whereas if you start looking for the positives, it can be a really happy world.
Love it. Awesome chatting to you. Nice to finally get inside your world and hear what your thoughts and views on doing empathy in a more conscious way is all about. So thank you for your time.
Total pleasure. All right, take care.
Bye.
Another chat to you.